Up close with the SKS, the Soviet Union's gift to the world, a U.S. weapons expert's perspective. Introduction. When I first encountered the SKS carbine as a young weapons analyst in the late stages of the Cold War, I regarded it with mixed emotions. On the one hand, the rifle was already being overshadowed in popular imagination by the infamous Kalashnikov, the AK-47, which had become a cultural symbol of both revolution and repression across much of the globe. On the other hand, the SKS had a quiet dignity of its own, and the deeper I studied it, the more I came to appreciate the role it played in shaping the military balance of the 20th century. The SKS is not just a rifle. It is a story of transition, a symbol of Soviet engineering pragmatism, and, in many ways, a political instrument. From the perspective of an American weapons expert, the SKS reveals not only the Soviet approach to small arms development, but also the way Moscow intended to project influence beyond its borders. To call the SKS a gift to the world is not mere rhetoric. It was, in fact, distributed to dozens of nations and countless non-state actors, leaving behind a legacy that continues into the 21st century. As Americans, we often see weapons technology through the lens of competition. Our Garand versus their Simonov, our M16 versus their AK-47. But to truly understand the SKS, one must set aside the instinct to measure superiority in terms of firepower or accuracy alone. The SKS must be seen in its historical, technical, and geopolitical context. Only then can we appreciate why this carbine remains one of the most recognizable rifles of the Cold War era. This essay will trace the origins, design, distribution, and combat record of the SKS. It will analyze the rifle's significance in relation to American weapons development and strategy. Most importantly, it will evaluate the broader legacy of the SKS as a tool of diplomacy, insurgency, and culture. For those of us who have spent our careers studying firearms not only as machines, but also as instruments of policy, the SKS offers a fascinating case study. Historical context. The SKS was born out of a moment of extraordinary transition in global military history. To understand its place, we must begin in the aftermath of World War II. The Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the war against Nazi Germany, emerged with a battle-hardened army, but also with a pressing need to modernize its small arms inventory. During the war, the Soviet soldiers' mainstay had been the Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle, a rugged but outdated design by the 1940s. The Red Army had experimented with semi-automatic rifles, most notably the SVT-38 and SVT-40. But those weapons proved expensive, complex, and ill-suited to mass conscription. At the same time, the United States had equipped millions of troops with the M1 Garand, a reliable, semi-automatic rifle that gave American infantry a significant firepower advantage. The Soviets recognized that the future of infantry weapons lay somewhere between the long-range bolt-action rifle and the submachine gun. The experience of urban combat in Stalingrad and other cities demonstrated that most firefights took place within a few hundred meters. A new approach was needed, a rifle that could deliver semi-automatic fire at medium ranges, firing an intermediate cartridge that balanced power with controllability. This is where Sergei Gavrilovich Simonov enters the story, a veteran designer who had previously worked on semi-automatic rifles. Simonov conceived a weapon that embodied the Soviet philosophy of good enough and mass-producible. His SKS, officially designated the Samozaryadny Karabin sistemy Simonov, or self-loading carbine of the Simonov system, was adopted in 1945, just as the Second World War came to a close. The SKS was chambered for the new 7.62 by 39 mm cartridge, itself a product of wartime lessons. The round was designed to be more powerful than a pistol cartridge, yet less punishing than a full-sized rifle cartridge, like the 7.62 by 54R. In this sense, it paralleled the American search for an intermediate solution, although the U.S. would not fully embrace such a concept until the adoption of the 5.56 by 45mm cartridge decades later. From the beginning, the SKS was envisioned as a stopgap, a bridge between the bolt-action legacy and the fully automatic future. Its adoption marked a transitional moment. It gave Soviet infantry a semi-automatic capability, but it was never meant to be the final answer. Indeed, even as the SKS entered service, Mikhail Kalashnikov was finalizing the design of his AK-47. Yet, the SKS was not rendered obsolete overnight. On the contrary, it was produced in the millions, issued widely across the Soviet Union, and exported in staggering quantities to Allied states and movements. For a weapon designed in the mid-1940s, its staying power is remarkable. From an American vantage point, the SKS represented both a challenge and a clue. In the Korean War, our troops first faced it in the hands of Chinese and North Korean soldiers. Reports from the field described a rugged, reliable rifle that could deliver accurate fire at typical combat distances. Later, in Vietnam, the SKS became a familiar sight alongside the AK-47. For American strategists, its proliferation was a reminder of the Soviet Union's ability to shape conflicts far beyond its borders through the export of small arms. The SKS thus occupies a unique historical niche. It was not the first semi-automatic rifle, nor was it the most advanced, but it was one of the most widely distributed, and its impact was global. To analyze it is to analyze the very nature of Cold War competition, a struggle fought not only with nuclear weapons and tanks, but also with the humble infantry rifle. 3. Technical anatomy of the SKS. When studying any firearm seriously, it is important not to stop at its place in history, but to dissect its anatomy, literally and figuratively. The SKS, while not as iconic as its successor, the AK-47, is a marvel of simplicity and functionality. From the perspective of an American weapons expert, I must confess that my first hands-on experience with an SKS was revelatory. What at first seemed like a crude Soviet carbine revealed itself as an elegantly balanced tool designed for mass mobilization. At the heart of the SKS lies its operating system, a short-stroke gas piston with a tilting bolt. To the layman who has ever studied the engineering of small arms, the choices Simonov made tell us much about Soviet priorities. The short-stroke piston system was a deliberate compromise between reliability and manageability. Unlike long-stroke pistons, which involved more moving mass and can make a rifle feel heavier in recoil, the short-stroke system of the SKS gave the weapon a relatively smooth firing cycle. The tilting bolt was not unique to the SKS. It had appeared in other rifles of the period, including earlier Simonov designs. But the combination of this locking method with the new intermediate cartridge created a weapon that was simple, durable, and easy to manufacture in Soviet factories that were still recovering from wartime destruction. Speaking of the cartridge, the 7.62 by 39 round deserves its own discussion. This cartridge is, in many ways, the real gift the SKS delivered to the world. Developed during the war years and formally adopted in 1943, it represented the Soviet embrace of the intermediate power concept. At muzzle velocity, it offered sufficient energy to engage targets effectively out to 300 to 400 meters, which coincided with the realities of modern infantry combat. For decades afterwards, this cartridge would become synonymous with Soviet bloc weaponry, chambered not only in the SKS, but also in the AK series and countless derivatives. From a technical standpoint, the SKS was not revolutionary in accuracy, but it was adequate. Most samples I have test-fired grouped within 3 to 4 minutes of angle under field conditions, which translates to combat-effective hits on man-sized targets at the ranges for which it was intended. For peacetime American shooters who later acquired SKS rifles through import channels, this level of accuracy sometimes seemed underwhelming compared to high-powered hunting rifles. But on the battlefield, it was more than enough. The feeding system of the SKS is one of its most distinctive features. Unlike detachable magazines, which had long been embraced in American and German designs, the SKS relied on a fixed 10-round magazine loaded from the top with stripper clips. At first glance, this seemed archaic, even in the 1940s, but it carried certain advantages. The fixed magazine eliminated the logistical burden of issuing and maintaining large numbers of detachable magazines, which could be lost, damaged, or expensive to produce. With stripper clips, ammunition could be carried more compactly, and soldiers could reload quickly in controlled bursts. The stock of the SKS was made of wood, most often birch or beech in Soviet production, though later Chinese versions used other materials. The overall length of the rifle was just over 40 inches, with a barrel length of 20 inches, striking a balance between maneuverability